pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Chris Bradford, thought of the day. Hi, Chris.
Hi, President Chris. How are you?
Very well yourself.
Good, thank you. Hey, well, since our speaker today is talking about UCLA sports, I thought it would be appropriate to hear some wisdom from Coach John Wooden. The Wizard of Westwood continues to be an inspiration to many long after his retirement and passing, and Coach Wooden has been quoted numerous times on his approach to teamwork and leadership. And here's just a sampling of his genius. He said, "Be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are. Also, consider the rights of others before your own feelings, and the feelings of others before your own rights. Don't measure yourself by what you have accomplished, but what you should have accomplished with your ability. And last, my perennial favorite, be quick, but don't hurry."
Thank you, Chris. I want you to know, I thought about your last remark for the last 30 years, and I'm still wondering the true meaning of it. I know, be quick, but don't hurry. But how do you explain that to your point guard?
Afraid you'll have to ask Coach Wooden.
Okay. Okay. All right. Our song of the day by untold.
Okay, I thought I'd select the Happy Wanderer because the topic is walking alone. And when I walk alone, I go wandering. So this is a quick song. I'm going to put my wandering hat on and sing. I love to go a-wandering along the mountain track. And as I go, I love to sing my knapsack on my back. Valderie, Valdera, Valderie, Valdera, ha, 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 ha. Valderie, Valdera, my knapsack on my back. Thank you. Thank you.
You're muted, Chris.
Do we have any guests or visiting Rotarians at this time? Nope. Okay. Announcements. I think we have several announcements. November 20th, we have what was formerly the Paul Harris Dinner Dance. It's going to be on a Sunday this year, and it's going to be for a late lunch. And I would encourage everybody to sign up for it. These are always very good, very well attended, and it's an opportunity to get to meet and see some other Rotarians from all over the district. And in the past, proceeds went to funding the International Rotary Scholars. I'd like to talk briefly. Our next meeting, the 29th, is going to be a Zoom meeting, and it's going to focus on our Impact Club. And Patrick Logano, who started Impact on the East Coast, will be presenting. I think it's an opportunity for all of us to get a little bit more insight into what he has accomplished in a very short period of time and how it's going to affect our club in the future. And regarding human trafficking, Diane Good has reached out to Brentwood Middle School and Brentwood High School. And as I've mentioned to you in weeks past, Rotary has a sex trafficking club. And one of the members is past district governor, Cosette. And Diane and I and Cosette and the president of the Human Trafficking Club are going to talk on Tuesday. And if anyone else would like to participate, please let either myself or Diane know. And we're going to try and set up a program for the schools and see if it can catch other schools' attention where we can spread it throughout West LA. Does anyone else have any announcements they'd like to share?
I do,
Okay.
President Chris. So I have two things I want to point out. First is if you, I don't know that we sent it out. I can certainly, I'm happy to do so, but the Westchester Club is looking for volunteers for October 1st from 9:30 to 11:30 at the Westchester Lutheran Church to assemble kits that I guess it's a meal assembly project that will be shared with the YMCA Food Pantry, Grassroots Neighbors, and the Food Pantry at LAX. So they're looking for volunteers, and this will be in next week's newsletter. Which is the other thing I'm going to point out to you. If you haven't read The Windmill, you should take a look at it. The board had a conversation and we decided we wanted to make it more about what the club is doing or plans to do and what opportunities are out there instead of so much about repeating what the speaker said the Thursday before. So we'd like your input once you take a look at it. And of course, if there's anything you want in the Windmill, please let me know. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, Taya. Last Thursday, I traveled to San Antonio with my wife, Rose, and we attended past District Governor Bill Goodwin's funeral. So I have a couple of photographs to bring back memories to some of those who know him very well. I first met Bill when I joined Rotary in February of 1984. Got to know he and Judy very well. We played tennis, we played paddle tennis, and we went to many Rotary events together. Let's put up the next slide. So here is a more recent picture of Bill. And that was his obituary. I'd just like to spend a minute on it and go over it with you. So Bill passed on May 23rd, 2022. He was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, and is preceded in death by both his parents. As a young boy, he learned to play golf and tennis, which were lifelong interests. He attended the Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia. He finished his education at the University of Southern California in Louisville after having served 3 years in the Marines, earning sharpshooting medals and awards. He set a range record, which stood for many years at the Marine Corps base at Parris Island. A late onset of chickenpox kept him from shipping out to Vietnam, and he remained at Parris Island to be a drill instructor. For over 27 years until present, Bill proudly served as a trustee of Trinity School for Ministry in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. As the seminary grew in reputation and stature, he watched and participated in the formation of the Anglican Communion in North America and greatly enjoyed the many friends around the world who came together over many years in its birthing. After serving as a trustee of the American Red Cross in Los Angeles, he became its chairman, then went on to become chairman of the American Red Cross Blood Services of Southern California. And in 1985-86, he was the Rotary International District Governor of the clubs in the Los Angeles area. Bill had senior management positions with several national wealth management and consulting firms and was a frequent guest lecturer at global leadership development conferences, including lecturing at the Haggai Institute leadership conferences several times at the behest of Dr. John Edmund Haggai. His love of sports, especially racket sports, was well known, and he played into his 80th year at the Santa Monica Beach Club in California. He was a member since 1972 when he moved to California from the South. In March of 2019, Bill and his wife, Judy, moved from Southern California to San Antonio, Texas, and became members of Christ Episcopal Church in San Antonio. He repeatedly expressed his appreciation for the depths of its leadership and the Christ-centered focus in worship. Bill is survived by his wife, 39 years, Judy, one stepson and daughter-in-law, Shell and Marisa, one stepdaughter and son-in-law, Jennifer, two grandsons, one sister in Louisville, and various family members and lifelong friends. I'm sorry that many of you did not have an opportunity to know Bill, but he was larger than life at times. When he spoke, people listened. He was very eloquent. He had a booming voice, and his passion outside of Judy and family and church was Rotary. So with that said, I just wanted to share with you, it was a beautiful ceremony, and I conveyed to Judy well wishes from all of us in Westwood Village. I will turn the meeting over to Tom. Will you please introduce our speaker?
I sure will.
Chris,
Thank you.
Oh, yes, Diane.
can I intervene for just a second to let the club know that we're making a donation in Bill's name to his church in San Antonio.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder to everyone before I introduce Dan, remember, because September 29th, as you said, Chris, we've canceled the in-person meeting. It's going to be a Zoom meeting, and next meeting will be October 6th at Guido's. So just so everybody remembers that. Today, it's my privilege to introduce Dan Taylor. We all remember the historic Jackie Robinson as he broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. But few people know another great Black athlete, Kenny Washington, who also attended UCLA and broke the color barrier in the National Football League a year earlier by joining the Los Angeles Rams. With us today is Dan Taylor, who has authored the book, Walking Alone, The Untold Journey of Pioneer Kenny Washington. This book was just released in July and reveals Kenny Washington's immeasurable impact on the sport of football. Washington was a great baseball player as well, and Taylor tells of efforts to make him the first Black player and baseball along with Robinson. It wasn't easy for Washington as Taylor delves into the verbal and physical abuse, but how he positively impacted ignorant teammates and rivals through his character and talent. I'm sure Dan will give us some insights into Kenny Washington's life, as he was one of the most popular athletes in Los Angeles. Dan is a former award-winning television sportscaster and the author of 5 books, including one on the Hollywood Stars. Dan, I remember going to the Hollywood Stars game when I was just a young lad, I'll tell you that. Dan also wrote a book, Rise of the Bulldogs, which I think is one of Fresno State Bulldogs, because that's where Dan lives, in Fresno. And guess what? Dan is the television broadcaster for the Fresno Grizzlies, a AAA team in the Pacific Coast League. He is also a member of the Society of American Baseball Research and a member of the Pacific Coast League Historical Society. So welcome to Rotary, Dan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to take advantage of screen sharing. I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation here with some video of Kenny and others. So bear with me as I click the appropriate boxes.
And Dan, please tell us how I can get a hold of that book. I'm definitely going to buy it. Kenny Washington is a local guy, UCLA guy, so be sure to mention that.
You got it. You got it. Let's see. Let me make sure I am doing the right thing here. Okay. All right. I titled this talk today, The Greatest. And as Tom explained, this comes from my new book, Walking Alone, The Untold Journey of Football Pioneer Kenny Washington. And if the question's posed, who was Kenny Washington? It's not going to surprise me if a few of you give me this kind of a look. I get it a lot. And in fact, my knowledge of Kenny Washington up till a couple of years ago was somewhat minimal. I mean, I knew that Kenny was a tremendous athlete at UCLA, going to a few Bruin games over the years. I saw the recognition of his number retirement, which told me he was a pretty good player. And I knew that he and Jackie Robinson starred in the same backfield for the 39 Bruins. And also that Kenny played for the Rams, joined them in 1946, and at that time reintegrated the National Football League. But I kind of had to rely on Groucho Marx to help me out a little bit more.
For those who don't follow football, this is one of the legendary names in the game. No, this one. This is Mr. Washington, the first man to ever throw $1 across the Potomac River. For those who don't follow.
And what he was alluding to there was some of Kenny's talents. This is filmed from 1939, UCLA Washington State game. And Kenny Washington as a back had the speed to get around the outside and run away from defenders. And he had the size, he was about 6'2", and he had the power and strength to run over defenders on off tackle plays. But one of his great attributes is Kenny Washington's throwing arm. Here he's throwing a short scoring pass to Jackie Robinson, but Kenny Washington could throw a football 100 yards in the air. He was really quite remarkable. He really is the guy that put UCLA football on the map. And the reason I say that is his senior year in 39, he led the nation in rushing. He led UCLA to its first ever undefeated season. They've had 2 in the program's history. And at the end of that 39 season, the Bruins finished 7th in the national rankings. Their game with USC, the final game of the season, December 9th, 1939, was really the biggest game in all of college football that year. And it wound up a scoreless tie, but to the winner went a shot in the Rose Bowl. And it was a defensive struggle back and forth.
Besides Jackie Robinson and Kenny Washington versus
Benny
Lansdowne and Bobby Robinson.
What was fascinating about the game was it set a record college football attendance, 103,300, and it came down to about the last play of the game.
Even to this day, I can reflect back of the.
This is Kenny Washington throwing the football.
They had, think of Kenny Washington and Jackie Robinson. They had a great football team.
Just a little look at that. But Kenny was the winner in 1939 of the Fairbanks Award. And this doesn't get much acclaim these days. which is really a shame because the Fairbanks Award, yes, it was named for the actor Douglas Fairbanks, who sponsored it. This predated the Heisman Trophy. And where the Heisman Trophy was voted on by sports writers who covered the game, the Fairbanks Award was voted on by college football players. Every single one in America. 1,661 college football players in 1939 voted on the Fairbanks Award. Kenny Washington was the unanimous winner, the first and only time in the many years that the Fairbanks Award was given out that it had a unanimous winner. Kenny was the very first UCLA athlete ever to have his number retired, number 13. And at the end of his senior season, he was not selected to play in the prestigious East-West Shrine Game. And it was a huge controversy up and down the West Coast. Sports writers and columnists in Southern California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, even in Oregon and Washington, really sharply criticized the game because the game said, oh, our selections were based on ability. And they were saying this was the best player in the country. What do you mean? And the pressure was such that finally the head of the selection committee admitted that they did not choose Kenny because of his race, because they wanted several players from Southern schools to participate in the game, and they thought they would decline to play if Kenny played in the game. UCLA was a trailblazing program. In 1939, they had 5 African-American players on their team. And what makes that really unique is that there were only 12 schools in the country in 1939 that had integrated football teams. There were only 25 Black college football players in America in 1939. UCLA had 5. And I should point out Woody Strode on the left, next to him, Jackie Robinson, Babe Harrell, the head coach, Kenny Washington, Ray Bartlett on the right, and Johnny Wynn kneeling in the front. And there's a lot of publications over the years that have said UCLA had 4 Black players. Not true, they had 5. 4 were starters, and Johnny Wynn was a reserve. And what I think has happened is there was a note in several newspapers during preseason practice that Johnny Wynn had left the team. But what they didn't follow up on was that the coaches got their players really good jobs back then. Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, for instance, had summer jobs working at Warner Brothers Studios. Well, Johnny Wynn worked as a porter on the train that ran from LA to Chicago and back. And so when preseason football practice started, he still had one run that he was committed to make. And so all these notices said, well, Johnny Wynn wasn't at practice, he left the team. Yeah, he left the team to make his last run to Chicago and back on the railroad. And when he came back, he rejoined the team. In fact, he made a game-saving tackle at the goal line in week 8 of the season to help the Bruins beat Oregon State. Kenny Washington was far and away the most popular athlete in Los Angeles. So popular, the legendary Joey Brown, the great comedic actor, paid tribute to Kenny Washington by wearing his UCLA jersey in the movie $1,000 a Touchdown. In his obituary, after F. Scott Fitzgerald passed, it was pointed out that his favorite player was Kenny Washington, and that F. Scott Fitzgerald rarely missed a UCLA home game. When Kenny Washington finished his last game at UCLA, Leo Popkin and his $1 million productions company actually wrote a motion picture script specifically for Kenny Washington to star in. The film is called While Thousands Cheer. It's kind of a holy grail of sports films. Even Kenny's family members told me that people have looked forever and there's no copy that anybody's been able to find of this film. But it was a film made with an all-black cast, 4 Black theaters around the country. And there were about 500 at that time in 1940. And it did very well at the box office. Actually, ultimately ended up playing in some predominantly white or all white cinemas around the country as well. And I think Washington's popularity, maybe one of the greatest things that he achieved, was his popularity had a lot to do with the Rams' decision when they left Cleveland to make Los Angeles their new home. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But when Washington left UCLA, well, when he finished his football playing days at UCLA, his plan was to come back after the Christmas break, wrap up his final few classes at UCLA and graduate, get his degree from UCLA, which he did. But from there, he was going to enroll at Loyola for law school and then go to work for the FBI. Well, that got derailed a little bit in the summer of 1940 when a new professional football league was created on the West Coast, the Pacific Coast Professional Football League. And outside of the NFL, which was not a real big thing then like it is today, there were 4 regional leagues around the country. And the Pacific Coast Football League was the only one of all those leagues, NFL and the regional leagues, that was integrated. And Kenny Washington commanded a salary higher than the highest paid player in the NFL. And he was an undeniable star. He was the sensation of the league. And I don't know what is more eye-catching here, Kenny's quick move here to get open, or the kick that the blocker makes on the player next to him. I think that'll incapacitate just about any defensive player getting kicked there. But Kenny played for the Hollywood Bears, and they played in Old Gilmore Stadium down in the Fairfax district, where CBS is located now, next to the Farmers Market. They sold that place out. Such was Kenny's popularity. And when they went on the road, whether it was just across town to the old Wrigley Field over there at 41st and Avalon, down to San Diego to Balboa Stadium, or out to Phoenix, or up to Oakland, when the Hollywood Bears and Kenny Washington came to town, it pulled the biggest crowds of the season. Well, the Rams at that time were not playing in big municipal stadium in Cleveland. They were playing in this baseball stadium in Cleveland, and they were not filling it. And in 1945, the Rams won the NFL championship, and only twice during that season did they come close to selling out their stadium, the 17,000 seat stadium. So Dan Reeves, the owner, started looking for a new home. He actually put a deposit down on the Cotton Bowl in Dallas with an idea of potentially going there. But ultimately, and I'm convinced that seeing what Kenny Washington and the Hollywood Bears were drawing, he realized the potential of the Los Angeles market. And so he elected to bring the Rams to Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Rams became the first major league team to play on the West Coast. Washington spent 3 seasons with the Rams and had mixed results. In his last game with the Hollywood Bears, he suffered a terrible knee injury. So his first season with the Rams, he really struggled. But in 47, he did amazing work in the summer to rehab his knee and to regain leg strength. And he came back in 47, and through about 2/3 of the way through the season, he was second in the league in rushing before he suffered an injury. And it was some of the part and parcel of the things that happened to him. After a run, a bunch of defensive players piled on him after the whistle, and they maliciously twisted his left leg, the leg that he had injured the previous season. And they re-injured, in twisting the leg maliciously, re-injured his knee, and he didn't play much the last few games of the season. That season, he set the Rams franchise record. He ripped off a 92-yard touchdown run in a game against the Cardinals. And to this day, that is still the Rams team record for the longest touchdown run from scrimmage. And his impact, I think, was far greater in the opportunities that he created. The NFL had Black players in the league in the 20s. 1933, Joe Lillard was cut by the Cardinals, and he was the last Black player. And for 12 years, the league's owners banded together and banned the signing of Black players. They denied it, but it was undeniable. And then Kenny came in 1946, and Woody Strode signed 2 months later. But in Kenny's last year in 1948, 2 other teams, and I'm certain it was watching Kenny and his character and the response to Kenny around the league. The Detroit Lions signed Wally Triplett out of Penn State, and the New York Giants signed Emlyn Tunnell. And those 2 teams, after the Rams, became the next 2 teams to integrate. In 1949, the Chicago Bears became the first team to select a Black player in the NFL draft. They chose George Taliaferro out of Indiana University. And when he was chosen, Taliaferro said, "I always said if I could ever get into an organized football arrangement, I'm going to be like Kenny Washington." But as interesting as it was to learn all that about Kenny Washington, there came to be a more shocking and surprising aspect of Kenny Washington that I had no idea about. And similarly with a lot of friends of mine who are big sports historians and longtime fans. And I'll let Groucho Marx let the cat out of the bag on that one.
Were you active in other sports besides football when you were in college?
Yes, Groucho. I played baseball. In fact, I believe that truly was my first love.
Indeed, Kenny played baseball at UCLA. He only played 1 season, the 1938 season. The reason for that being, in his freshman year in 37, they couldn't scrape together enough players to create a freshman team. And then, as I alluded to earlier, the football coaches getting the players really good jobs. In 39, the Bruins played in the Pineapple Bowl in Honolulu on January 2nd. And by the time the ship returned and the team got back to campus, the baseball preseason had begun. And so Kenny accepted a job at Warner Brothers and passed on playing baseball. But he was the first African-American to play baseball for UCLA. And that one season, he was the all-league shortstop. He hit .409 in league play, and he led the league in home runs. And what was interesting was he was far and away the best player in the league. Yet, to give you a comparison, Cal had a player by the name of Sam Chapman, their outfielder. And at the end of that season, Chapman signed with the Philadelphia A's, went straight to the big leagues, never spent a day in the minor leagues. And he was 14th in the league in hitting. And Kenny Washington finished second in the league in hitting and led the league in home runs. The sports editor of the San Francisco Examiner, Prescott Sullivan, wrote during that season, leading hitter, best shortstop in the college baseball out our way is Kenny Washington of UCLA. Coaches of other teams say he has major league ability, but big league scouts aren't interested in him. Washington is a Negro. But Kenny Washington 3 times was in a position to be the guy to integrate baseball. The first, it was kind of an innocent opportunity in 1940, but a real serious opportunity rose in 1943. Of course, America was at war, and that was really affecting baseball very significantly. Minor league baseball teams lost almost 1,500 players to military service. And on the eve of spring training in 1943, many teams were very public that they were struggling to find players. And when the Hollywood Stars and the Los Angeles Angels and the Pacific Coast League made that announcement, the editors of 2 African-American newspapers in Southern California, the Sentinel and the Eagle, they approached both those teams with a solution. And they told the business managers, the men who ran the Stars and the Angels, that Kenny Washington was a solution. And they also provided a list of Negro League players who were now living in the area and working in defense industry jobs, working, for instance, at the Lockheed plant over in Burbank and other places. Well, what was very interesting was the Stars rejected it out of hand. Their manager said he wasn't interested, but the LA Angels, their president said, yeah, we'll give Kenny Washington a shot. We'll bring him into spring training. This was in 1943. But as spring training approached, nothing ever happened, no word. And when the editors got back to Pants Rowland, who was running the Angels, he said, well, I put it to our manager, and he said, we've got enough players, and he's not interested. The Board of Supervisors took this up. They expressed their outrage, and they pointed out that Kenny Washington would be an ideal guy to integrate professional baseball. And they pointed out that the Pacific Coast League might be the ideal league. UCLA was playing in many of those same markets in football. There was no trouble with hotels or restaurants. The teams on the West Coast did not have separate seating for blacks like you had in the South, for instance, in parts of the East. And the supervisors unanimously voted a resolution deploring the discrimination, and they asked baseball moguls to put an end to it. 1945, Jackie Robinson. This was when Branch Rickey instructed the Dodgers' top minor league team, the Montreal Royals, to sign Robinson. He was going to spend the 46th season in Montreal, preparing to hopefully join the Dodgers in 1947 and integrate Major League Baseball. But Branch Rickey had made it very clear that Jackie wasn't going to be the only one. He was going to sign 2 black players who would spend the 1946 season with the Montreal Royals. And Jackie Robinson urged Branch Rickey to make Kenny Washington the second player. And there was a lot of lobbying going on within the Dodger organization. There were coaches, scouts, managers who had seen black players in Army games and in Negro League games. And so there was a lot of lobbying. But Wendell Smith was the sports editor, actually, of the Pittsburgh Courier. And Wendell Smith was he was a confidant of Branch Rickey's. Wendell Smith covered the Negro Leagues very thoroughly, knew the players well, and Rickey really relied on him for insight. And Wendell Smith wrote this letter a couple of weeks after Robinson's signing. And in it, he said, I'm suggesting very seriously that you consider Kenny Washington. I understand he is much better than Jackie Robinson. So why did it happen? Well, it was the last week of January when the Dodgers finally made contact with Kenny Washington. And Washington told them, I answered no because I had other plans. So what were those other plans? Well, a couple of weeks prior, the Cleveland Rams made public their intention to leave Cleveland and move to Los Angeles. Their general manager, Chili Walsh, came out to lock up a lease deal with the Coliseum. And while he was out, he had a meeting with Kenny Washington, at which time Washington secretly agreed that he would sign with the Rams. The Rams did not want a word of it to leak out. They wanted to hold it until the front office staff officially moved into their offices in Los Angeles in March. In fact, the team's very first press conference when they became the Los Angeles Rams was to announce the signing of Kenny Washington. Washington told reporters later, when asked about the Dodger opportunity, he said, "I'm a man of my word. I had given the Rams my word. I couldn't go back on it." But still, throughout his first season with the Rams, baseball popped up from time to time. Leo DeRocher in November of 1946 said that the Dodgers were on the verge of signing Kenny Washington. It didn't happen, and the reason for that was the major knee surgery that he had right before the start of training camp, and the scouts had watched him play football, didn't like the way he ran, and they decided to hold off. So Kenny played 3 seasons with the Rams. He retired after their final game at the end of the 1948 season, and almost immediately baseball came back into the picture. And it was Bing Crosby was the first. Bing Crosby pounced. He was a part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he offered Kenny Washington the opportunity to join the Pirates. And had he would have integrated the Pittsburgh Pirates. The San Diego Padres, then a minor league team in the Pacific Coast League, they offered Washington a contract for the 1949 season. And only the year before, 1948, they had integrated the Pacific Coast League when they signed the player on the right, John Ritchie. But Washington turned him down. And the reason for that was he'd previously given commitments to appear in 3 motion pictures. The first was Rope of Sand, in which he performed opposite Burt Lancaster. The second was a film called Pinky. He was personally recruited for the role of a doctor by the head of the studio, Darryl F. Zanuck. This was a real controversial picture because it involved an interracial love story and an interracial kiss. And there were a number of communities and counties in the South that banned this picture. And it ultimately made its way to the Supreme Court as a result, and the picture prevailed. Jean Crane and Ethel Barrymore were the female stars of the film, and both were nominated for Academy Awards, and Washington had the role of a doctor in this film. And the third film that he had agreed to do was his buddy Jackie Robinson's picture. And kind of funny, Jackie was asked, he played himself, for those of you who haven't seen it. Jackie played himself in the film. And a reporter asked Jackie on the eve of the start of filming if he was nervous about acting. And he said, "Me, nervous? No, because if Kenny Washington can do it, I can do it." But throughout all this, Kenny became very determined to take his shot at baseball. He spent a couple of months at Ross Snyder Playground, working out 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And just before spring training began, he was offered a contract and joined the New York Giants. And it was a big, big story at that time, if this football legend could potentially make the jump and also play Major League Baseball. At the start of the exhibition opener, he had a lot of things going against him. Kenny was the oldest rookie in any spring training camp. He was 31. He had had 5 knee surgeries from football injuries up to that point. And Kenny had not played competitive baseball in 5 years. He played during the war with the police department team and had played in some exhibition games, but hadn't played any competitive ball in 5 years. Excuse me. And the Giants roster was pretty well set. DeRocher gave him a shot. Leo DeRocher was the manager of the Giants at that time. Gave him a shot at the right field job. And Washington had some big games. In an exhibition game with USC, hit a grand slam, a 2-run triple, drove in 6 runs. But a couple of days later, right at the end of spring training, DeRocher called him in and told him he was not going to make the club. And he said, make no mistake about it, Kenny can really wrap that ball. Nobody has worked any harder in camp than Kenny. I was disappointed in his throwing. Football must have tightened up his arm and shoulder muscles. But why? In Washington, the Giants wanted to put him at one of their minor league teams, but Kenny said he had a young family, and if he was going to play minor league baseball, he wanted it to be on the West Coast. And DeRocher made some calls to recommend him, and the Los Angeles Angels signed him on the eve of opening night, and he joined the Angels. Throughout the month of April, kind of got his game going, ended up starting at third base for the Angels, got hurt late in the month of April, and ultimately decided he would retire. And so from baseball, he became a business executive, was in the wholesale liquor distribution business. In 1956, he was inducted into the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame. That's the College Football Hall of Fame. And when the Dodgers moved west, Walter O'Malley recruited Washington to be an advisor. And he helped out with the ticket sales, trying to develop strategies to sell tickets into the African-American community in Southern California. And he actually helped the scouting department with insights into players that he had seen play. Kenny Washington passed in 1971. He was 52 when he passed. He had suffered a fatal and incurable heart-lung disease, spent much of the last 2 years of his life in and out of hospitals before he passed. And this plaque is in the Los Angeles Coliseum that reads, "An All-American for All America." Jackie Robinson, in a speech to the NAACP, talked about his friend, and he wrote, or he said, I should say, "When you talk about the great players of all time and you forget Kenny Washington, you're forgetting the greatest." I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Kenny Washington, and certainly very open to taking questions and having more conversation with any and all of you.
I have a question, Dan. You know, I'm a sports fan, and I've read about all these athletes, et cetera, and Jackie Robinson especially. And I knew Kenny Washington's name, but I didn't realize the background and what a great athlete he really was. How did you come into writing this book? What thought process went into doing the research on Kenny Washington?
You sound like my editor at Roman and Littlefield. I have a great friend, and I don't know if any of you may have known of him. His name's Artie Harris. He's a west side of LA guy, longtime baseball coach at Venice High, won 2 city championships there and started the program at West LA before joining the Dodgers as a scout. Artie's a UCLA guy, played baseball there in the late 50s. And we had a conversation 2-3 years ago. And Artie shared with me, it kind of startled me. And he said, when he came back from Vietnam, he was teaching at UCLA. And there were 2 members of the faculty who had been there in 1939. And they both insisted that Kenny was the far greater player to Jackie. And when Artie started coaching at Venice High, he said that a fellow coach had been a teammate in 39 and said the same thing. And so when Artie told me that, I started trying. I'd heard of Kenny Washington, as I mentioned. And so I started looking him up, and I was just like you, Tom. I was floored. And I just thought, why has nobody told this story before? This is absolutely amazing. And of course, when I reached out to the editor I work with at Roman and Littlefield, she said, "Are you telling me this story's never been told?" And I said, "I find no record of it ever having been told." So that's how the wheels started turning. Even, Kenny's family, he has a daughter, some grandkids. His son passed away a number of years ago. And they've told me that his daughter said that for many, many years, he was just daddy. And kind of a funny aside, she said she came home from middle school one day to find Willie Mays sitting at their kitchen table talking sports with her dad. And she said, listening to them, she said, "Sounds like my dad was somebody." And she started trying to learn, but it wasn't long before he got ill and passed away. And so, they were very upfront that their ability to help me was somewhat limited, but they've just been amazed to learn all these things about their father and grandfather as well. So, yeah, I think this is a guy that, I think Jackie Robinson has been a big shadow over Kenny Washington, and understandably and justifiably with all the acclaim he's received. I think we've forgotten Kenny. And I also think that the popularity of baseball when Jackie signed, it was truly the national pastime. And football may have been 6th or 7th on the interest list. You go back to papers in 46, 45, Jackie signing is huge headlines in almost every paper in the country. And Kenny is just a note in a list of sports notes because football just wasn't that big a deal then. So I think all of that has kind of contributed to push Kenny's story to the side. And I certainly hope I can change that a little bit.
No. Any other questions? I would like, as I alluded to before the meeting started, I'd like your thoughts on UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten.
Well, I'm a traditionalist. I still don't like that other conferences with great historic rivalries broke up. The Nebraska's leaving and Missouri leaving and, those sorts of things, the old Southwest Conference breaking up and whatnot. I love the traditions of rivalries and whatnot, but it's a different day. It's a different game. I don't think it's done. From everything I hear, talking to people that I know in college athletics, they seem to feel pretty strongly that now that the Big Ten's lined up its new television deals and knows what their revenues are going to be, that we'll probably see Cal, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington join UCLA and SC in the Big Ten. So you'll have two 10-team divisions. That kind of leads to Utah, Colorado, Arizona State potentially going into the Big 12. And the end, as we know it, of the Pac-12, and potentially Washington State, Oregon State coming into the Mountain West Conference. That seems to be talk that's floating, and nothing being attributed to anybody of any consequence that's saying this is definitely going to happen. But that seems to be the consensus of thinking out there, and the way the rumor mill goes. So yeah, it's a different day, and money seems to drive everything these days, and it certainly has driven the expansion of the SEC, and now it's doing it in the Big Ten.
Wow.
What you're really saying is the Big 12 is going to be evaporated.
I think the Pac-12.
Pac-12.
Yeah, I do. That's the indication I'm getting. Because I think what they would like to see is two 10-team geographic divisions, and it would make a lot of sense for UCLA and USC to have some company on the West Coast, so the travel isn't going to be as crazy. You got to remember, football can leave on Wednesdays, and that's just probably 5 or 6 road trips a year. But now you're talking basketball, and you're talking volleyball, and you're talking a lot of other sports having to make those trips to Rutgers and Penn State and Indiana, and it's going to be a huge change. So that's the sense that I'm getting from people that I'm talking to, is that it's not done yet.
Wow.
I got to digest all this.
It's tough because you look at, for instance, I saw a story a couple of years ago, and they were talking about Arkansas going into the SEC, and they said, previously when they were in the Southwest Conference and whatnot, their fans had the ability to get to just about any away game within an hour and a half, 2 hours. Well, now the nearest away game is a 6-hour drive, and so it had really affected support. And sometimes I wonder if athletic administrators lose sight of those things. The easy way to balance a budget or to generate a profitable revenue stream is to look at just TV dollars rather than trying to develop other sources of revenue. So, but that's just me.
Yeah, Mike.
With what you just said, and it's probably way too far to predict, but what happens to the rivalries, the bowl games? What kind of playoffs do you envision with what you just said?
Well, they talked about increasing the playoffs now to 12 teams. So that's going to take up probably a lot of additional bowl games for the playoff. I think the whole bowl scenario is, as we know it, completely changes, which I think is sad. I think some of the Rose Bowl, the tradition, and I should mention that Kenny Washington played a part in that Rose Bowl tradition, because that year in '39, Tennessee had already committed to be the opponent of the Pacific Coast Conference champion in the Rose Bowl. Well, when UCLA beat Oregon State and Washington State, and now they're going to go into the SC game undefeated, Tennessee steps back and realizes, hey, we may have to play a team with 5 black players. And they sent word that if it's UCLA in the game, we're not coming. And that sent the conference into discussions with the Big Ten, the idea of their champions contracting to meet annually in the Rose Bowl. So yeah, I think it's sad. I've always loved the tradition and the history of college football. I've loved the bowl game matchups, conference matchups and whatnot. But I think we're going to see all that change, and these major bowl games are all just going to be playoff games.
Yeah. We heard hearsay that UCLA had a deficit of
It's not hearsay. It's not hearsay. It's over $100 million.
Yeah, and so they felt compelled. Whoever did the contract for the Pac-12 certainly wasn't a moneymaker for them. And then all of a sudden, the amount of television money that they're seeing, which can eliminate their deficit, it seemed as if, at least the selling point, was they had no choice but to move forward.
They were put in a bind. They had a bad shoe deal that the company struggled and had to back out of it. UCLA sued, and after the Big Ten agreement, they got a massive, I think it was $60-some million award from the court on that. But yeah, they had struggled mightily economically. They have not really ever drawn substantially in the Rose Bowl. When Dan Guerrero was the athletic director, he, having been a baseball guy, was very sensitive to the Olympic sports and didn't want to make cuts, and was very concerned about those programs and the coaches and the athletes. And so he really held off, kind of kicked the can down the road. I don't mean that in a negative way, but that was, it was going to come due someday. And when they made the change and Martin Jarman came in, he is staring at this massive deficit. And the quick, easy way to eliminate that was when USC made the phone call and said, hey, let us show you this spreadsheet we've been working on and this opportunity that we think we're going to pitch. And if we do this, here's what you can generate from it, or you gain. And that's one way to eliminate that deficit. I don't know. I do think the conference dropped the ball. I still think this conference has not, the Pac-12 has not taken advantage of its proximity to Silicon Valley to meet with some of the tremendous minds up there and see what other things could be done and revenues that could be generated. And I still, even to this day, think even after those schools made that announcement, if it was me and I was the commissioner, which I'm not obviously, but I would have hightailed it to Silicon Valley, started knocking on doors and trying to see what sorts of things can be developed, what's in development, where over the coming months or years, what can we do to generate enough revenue, maybe make these schools forget about it and show that we can generate as much, if not more, for our own schools. But they have not done that. So I think that's hurt them, the lack of ingenuity. I think they were at the forefront of a television network, but it didn't do what they had hoped it would do, which is unfortunate.
I'll tell you, the last 3 games at the Rose Bowl, it's a ghost town.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disheartening.
Well, I could be real nasty here and say you need to schedule Fresno State more often. We'll bring 20,000 down, but I don't think you want those results that you had last year. Sorry to bring that up. I apologize. But whispers I'm hearing is that they're 5 years away from moving to SoFi. When that lease agreement runs out with the Rose Bowl, they may very well make SoFi their home, which I think for folks on the West Side would be a lot easier commute.
Oh, yes.
I thought about that a number of times, about SoFi being the place where they should go, but
well, I can't reveal my sources, but I kind of hear whispers that, we're not the only ones having that conversation, and that when the Rose Bowl lease runs out, that very well could be an announcement that's made. And I think that would help attendance considerably.
Oh, yeah.
Dan, a quick question about the book itself. How much time, percentage-wise, do you spend on research versus actual writing? Is it 50-50 or is it?
No. It's probably 60-30 research. It's much more into research. I really enjoy research. I have a lot of fun with it. This was a challenge for a couple of different reasons. One, that, as Kenny's daughter pointed out to me when I asked her a couple of questions in our first conversation, she said, my dad would be 104 if he was still alive today. And so everybody from that era was gone, and that made it very challenging. And of course, a lot of the research was being done during the pandemic, the lockdowns. So the library at UCLA was closed. The LA library was closed. It was very challenging to get information. The UCLA Sports Information Office, they were working from home, didn't have access to a lot of their information. So that made it quite a challenge, but it all worked out in the end. I mean, there's a lot I wish I could have gotten answered, but I don't think I was ever going to get those answers. So we went ahead and moved forward. But Yeah, it was a challenge.
You never told me how I can get a hold of the book.
It is available on Amazon.com. It is out there on BarnesandNoble.com. The publisher is Roman and Littlefield, and their website is roman.com. That is ROWMAN.com.
Okay.
All right, well, on behalf of the club, thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I've known about Kenny Washington my entire life, and you certainly filled in a lot of historical information. So I have a better picture of him in my own mind, so thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you.
Okay, next week, for the next 2 weeks are going to be Zoom meetings, Impact, and what did I say? We have,
October 6th, we're going to be at Guido's.
and then October 6th, we'll be back at Guido's. Anybody have any final comments before we are finished for the day? All right, thank you all for attending, and we are done. Thank you.